Good evening all, it's Cristo, late night here on Talk Radio. We've been having a bit of a chat tonight about the criminal justice system and whether we are letting down certain victims, women and children especially. And a lot of you reacting as well to the call just before the break there. One person here saying, that Scottish man has upset me so much, there's no justification on raising his hand to a woman or a man. But I think we got there in the end. I think what troubled me about his call at first was this idea that whenever I kept asking him, well, why did you do that? It was automatically, well, she did this. No. Why did you do that? Well, she did that. She was like, no, her behaviour has nothing to do or shouldn't have anything to do with why you did that. That is not the justification. So and hopefully we, as part of the education that we've given him tonight, he will see that himself. Joanne is not impressed though, doesn't think that we should have him on again because doesn't actually believe the words that you heard there, Joanne. Thank you very much indeed for that. Okay. We are, of course, as well talking about Mayreed Philpott and the fact that she is being released from prison. She's the child killer who was married. I don't know if she still is married to Nick Philpott. They were convicted of the deaths of their 6 children. And after a 7-year sentence, she is being released. Is this the right decision, or are we letting down certain victims, women and children especially? Well, Steve Dagworthy is a former prisoner and prison consultant and joins me live on the line. Evening to you, Steve.
Good evening to you.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to us here on Talk Radio. Let's start with Mayreed Philpott, because this is a really emotive case, and a lot of people will be looking at this and thinking that 7 years is no sentence at all for the gravity of that crime and her involvement in it. What's your reaction to people who have that view?
Well, I obviously sympathise with what they're saying, and to a degree, it does seem quite remarkable. But Mayreed was sentenced to 17 years in prison, and on the face of it, she was given a determinate sentence. So, what that means is that the law states that she will serve half of her sentence in prison and half of her sentence on licence. So the problem is not the fact that she's being released. The problem is clearly that the sentence at the outset possibly wasn't the correct sentence. And if she'd have been given a sentence under a lifer tariff, then it would have been the parole board that decided whether she would be released or not. And obviously the parole board would make the decision as to whether she's safe. But the fact is she has to be released. And the little work that I've been able to find on this, and the information I've been able to find, is that looks like she's going to be released to an approved premises or a hostel, so she's not being released back into the community straight away. She'll be living under further restrictions, although less restrictions than there are in prison. And she is on licence, and no doubt there are going to be very many restrictions on her licence. On one false move, without doubt, someone of that notoriety, I'm sure she'll be straight back into prison again, which could mean her serving the full length of her sentence, which I'm sure will please a lot of people.
Well, it just seems 7 years. I mean, of course, when the sentence took place, 17 years, I think a lot of people thought, well, at least that seems like a suitable punishment. I understand the dilemma of needing to incentivise prisoners to be well behaved, because, of course, that's the way that a lot of the prison population is kept well behaved. But the problem is, though, that surely 7 years, I mean, it's too short a time.
Well, no, she would have done 8.5. I mean, she was sentenced in 2013. I'm guessing she spent a period of time on remand.
Yeah, she must. I think it was 2012 was the crime, and they went straight into remand not long after May, I think.
So she will have served 8.5 years in prison. And yes, I mean, on the face of it, it seems wrong. But I go back to the point that, this is the sentence, and this is the way that our society works, and we don't lock people up. Very rarely do we lock people up forever, and we don't execute people anymore. So the fact of the matter is that everybody who goes to prison saving a very small percentage of the prison population will be coming out of prison, and they will be coming back into the community. But, she is at risk she is on licence, and, not that she deserves it, but her life going forward is not going to be that easy. And it's not about being good in prison. We're not rewarding her for being good in prison. She hasn't been punished for being bad. I mean, clearly she would have served a greater period if she'd have committed any offence while she was in prison, would have got extra days added, which she clearly hasn't, or doesn't appear to have done. But the fact is, she's not being released because of good behaviour. She's being released because the law says that's when she's got to be released.
Well, yes, but had she not have been well behaved, she would have been doing the full sentence, right?
No, I'm afraid that's wrong. I mean, the fact is that it's at law that she will be released halfway through the sentence, as I was, and as 99% of the population.
And forgive me if I got it wrong, because I thought that this was how it works. So then, what is the point then in sentencing someone for a longer period and then releasing them halfway through? Because I thought that the incentive for the halfway through release was, of course, how they behaved during their time in prison. And if they didn't behave well during their time in prison, they don't get that halfway release. So that's not how it works.
That's not how it works. I mean, there were two types of sentences. There's determinate and indeterminate. So there are standard prisoners and there are lifers. Okay. Now, if you're serving a lifer sentence, so it's a life terrorist. So when you hear about people who have been given a life sentence but given a 20-year recommended.
Yes.
What that means is they've got to serve 20 years before they can be considered for release.
A minimum part of that life sentence.
And then they have to persuade the parole board that they're safe to be released. Now, obviously, when the parole board are sitting, they will look at the history of that individual through their sentence. And if they've spent their prison sentence beating people up, smashing up cells, bringing drugs and phones into the prison and whatnot, then they're highly unlikely to be released. But on a determinate sentence, you are released halfway unless you commit an offence in prison which could result in extra time being added, which can happen and does happen a lot. But we're talking, days and weeks as opposed to more years. But the fact is, in this case, her sentence is 17 years. And her sentence doesn't stop until that 17th anniversary. But the way the structure works is that she's allowed out on licence in the community for the second half of her sentence under strict rules and regulations, and any breach of any of those regulations, then it's go to prison, do not pass go. I mean, there's no trial. You just go back to prison. And somebody like her is quite likely that she would, if she did breach licence conditions, is likely to spend the rest of her time in prison.
I mean, what would you say to anyone listening to this, though, that thinks that is going to be absolutely infuriated to hear that essentially she's going to be enjoying the freedom that her children... And I realise what you're saying, it's a limited amount of freedom. It's not freedom in the sense where you can just go about your life in a totally normal way. But a lot of people will be saying, well, it's a hell of a lot more freedom than her children now have.
Well, yeah, I can only agree with that, but it's the way the law of the land works. And it's the same for everybody. It's the same for everyone that goes to prison. And everyone can have the argument, depending on what the type of sentence is, whether they should be allowed to come out of prison if they've committed theft or violence or whatever it is that they put them in prison in the first place. It's just the way the world works. Now, the Justice Secretary quite recently made a speech where they are looking at the sentencing policies, and they are looking to lock more of the heinous crimes. People who commit heinous crimes up for that little bit longer, where they do 2/3 as opposed to half.
I thought so. That's not come in yet, because I know that they were looking at if your sentence is over 10 years, then rather than, as you just alluded to, the halfway point being released, it's the 2/3 point. But I wasn't sure what the progress was with that.
I think that's coming in, or is in certain cases. I think it's 7 years is the threshold in some cases.
Okay.
But that goes to those of violent or sexual nature crimes, and where it's deemed that it's appropriate that they should be in prison longer. But the problem is not the sentencing; it's the prisons. I mean, the problem we have in prisons is that we're very good at locking people up. We're not very good at rehabilitating them when they're in there. And as much as all your listeners will probably shout and scream at the radio saying, well, prison is for punishment, actually it's not. I mean, prison is the punishment. The purpose of prison is to rehabilitate offenders. And that's where we get it wrong. And what your listeners need to understand is that the recidivism rate is so high that we have something like £4 billion a year bill to run the prisons, but it's cost us £18 billion a year is the cost of reoffending, 18 billion quid. Now, if we could get that down and actually be better at rehabilitating offenders whilst they're in prison and give them a chance to lead good lives when they come out, then the taxpayer is getting a better bang for their buck, and actually the prison system would work that much better.
But on that note, because obviously that's a lot about whether someone can make a decent contribution to society after they've been in prison, we've got to talk about this story as well, because it was in the newspapers today, and that is the Catholic primary school deputy head, 31 years of age, who was spared jail for secretly watching child rape videos on the dark web while his wife and his own child slept. The reason why he was spared jail is because of the fact that he has such potential. He was seen as someone who was particularly bright, particularly clever, and when the defence were mitigating, they said he's well educated and very successful in his chosen occupation, becoming a deputy head at a very young age, having been fast-tracked due to his great potential. There is no suggestion of any impropriety in the workplace. He's always known the children in his school as no more than pupils in his care. His private life was separate from his public responsibilities. So he had a 10-month sentence, suspended for 2 years, and it was that potential which is being put forward as the reason why he was spared jail. I mean, again, can we really be talking and mitigating someone viewing child pornography on the web because of the potential they have to be a good citizen aside from those actions? Or do you think that we should be throwing those people away and putting those people away and throwing away the key, because your potential, should it be in no way a mitigating circumstance when viewing such heinous material?
Well, Cristo, I think you're wrong, actually, because I'm not sure that his sentence was suspended on the basis that he had such a great potential. In the information that your producer sent to me earlier on that I've read time and time again,
yep.
Where the references to his potential and the fact that he was fast-tracked and a pillar of society and obviously had tremendous potential going forward, that was mentioned by his mitigating barrister as a picture to how much he's suffered as a consequence of his offending behaviour. Now, some may say, well, he deserves that, but, let's bring this into context. I mean, his mitigating barrister is on his feet on the day, has to come up with something for his client to try and persuade the judge to look down the lower end of the spectrum as far as sentencing is concerned. So I'm not entirely certain that he was given what may be considered a light sentence on the basis that he's had such great potential, because as the sentencing judge says, I quote, "What was your chosen profession is unlike to be a profession open to you for the future. You have that punishment in addition to the punishment passed by the court." So she made the fact that he had taken such a great falling from grace as a result of his offending behaviour and something he needs to live with. Now, when it comes to the sentence, he was given a 10-month suspended sentence. Some may say that that's too soft. That's the decision of the judge. That's within the sentencing guidelines. But in saying so, I mean, I go back to prison again. I mean, a 10-month sentence in prison results in 5 months in prison. Actually, halfway, he's going to get released. Absolutely pointless. I mean, he's going to go to prison, costing the taxpayer something in the region of 4,000 quid a month. It was cheaper to send him to Eton. And, the bottom line is that the judge has decided that along with the sexual harm prevention order and registered as a sex offender, that he will serve, he'll have a suspended sentence for 2 years. In that time, he has to deal with its offending behaviour programs, which all goes to rehabilitation in the community, as opposed to going to prison. But again, rest assured, this is a suspended sentence. So, crossing a red light would put him back in prison.
However, Steve, that fall from grace came from a role where he was in a trusted position with children. So I find it actually really troubling that the trusted position that he was in with children is being used as a way of mitigating his sentence, because essentially, well, he's lost that really lovely potential role that he had. He's had that fall from grace from that really important role. Well, far from that important role being a reason to mitigate his sentence, I would say that important role is the reason why his sentence should have been longer. He was working with children.
Yes, of course. I mean, you're right in what you're saying, but as I said, I mean, in context, this is what his mitigating barrister said on his feet. That's what he was paid to do. He has to try and get the best result for his client. He's trying to point to the fact, as he would do with any other client. So if it was a city worker committed a fraud or whatever, that his offending behaviour has completely crucified his career, and as such, that should be taken into consideration when passing sentence. The judge, now whether we agree with the judge or not is one thing or another. That's up for debate. But we have judges, and it's our system, and we have these individuals who make these judgments, and we trust that their judgments are correct. Has decided that the appropriate sentence in this case is a 10 months suspended 2 years.
So do you think that maybe we should be looking, when it comes to all of these sorts of crimes involving children, crimes involving violence against women, should we be campaigning as a society, some of us that believe it, for longer sentences? Or would you say that that's going to be counterproductive because of the reoffending rate?
The prison system is broken. I mean, we need root and branch reform of everything. Okay, now the Justice Secretary is looking at sentencing. If you actually read his statement, although he patterns it as we're going to get tough on violence and sex offenders, actually when you go through the speech, the main body of the speech, he's going to, we need to get smart about sentencing. Okay, now arguably, and I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with this, and I'm not saying I do agree with it, arguably this is a smart sentence. Okay, now the problem with the prison system is the prison system's like a leaking bucket. Okay, you need to fix the bucket before you keep pouring water in. Now, what you're saying is that we need to bang people up for longer periods. Well, we need to fix the prison system before we do that. Otherwise, what we're actually going to do, we're breeding more offending, the recidivism rates will go up, the taxpayer will have to bear the burden, we're creating more victims, we're creating more crime.
So how would you, be a good thing. So how would you, because a lot of people listening, and I'm not necessarily against reforming the prison system, I think where we have the problem here with any kind of reform of the prison system would be that people would then listen to that and think, well, that sounds like it's going to be giving prisoners more of a cushy ride. So how do you get the balance right between making sure that it's fair enough that prisoners get the harsh treatment that they deserve and their freedoms taken away, but also it not be counterproductive and obviously lead to higher offending rates?
We have to do one or two things. We either have to build a lot more prisons and make those prisons effective, which means employing far more prison officers, employing far more probation officers, and employing far greater offender behaviour programs so that we can actually rehabilitate offenders. Or that's going to cost a lot more money. That's going to cost a fortune. Okay. Or we have to reduce the prison numbers, but only have people in prison who need the rehabilitative process. Now, what we're great advocates, and you're talking to someone who's not only been in prison, but I work with prisons and work with them day in and day out, every day.
So what is the rehabilitative process?
So the rehabilitative process is the offender behaviour programs, such as thinking skills. You get to the point where you identify the triggers that cause the offending behaviour, and you try and cure that individual, that those causes will not come up again in the future, or if they do come up, they'll look at things slightly differently. Now, that comes in two ways. That's education, in offender behaviour programs, and simple education, and also making prisons tough. And please believe me, prisons are tough. I've been there. Okay. So, but at the same time, there is pointless. We're great advocates on something called executive release, and that is that a sentencing judge may pass a sentence, in my case, of 6 years. Okay. Now, to be honest with you, in my case, 2 years would have done it. 3 years would have done it, because there was nothing happening in the second half of my sentence that I didn't achieve in the first couple of years. And if I'd have been assessed at that point, I probably, the Wyoming Margam, should have been released. And we represent a number of people who are serving fairly long sentences who deserve to go to prison. I'm not saying that they don't deserve to be there, but they deserve to go to prison, who have shown and effectively proved as best as they can, as the system will allow them to, that they are safe to be back into the community again. So if you start the period, so going back to our first point, is a sentence is half in the community, half in prison, half in the community. Keeping the sentence, take a 10-year sentence, 5 in and 5 out. So if that person is serving a 10-year sentence, if after 3 years they've achieved all their targets and have basically convinced everyone that they're perfectly safe to be let back into the community, then there must be a panel of judges to oversee and receive applications to judicially review whether these people are safe into the community. Therefore, they can start their licence period early. We're not letting them out. We're not giving them the freedom. We're just starting their licence period early. Now, what that will do, in effect, is we'll reduce the prison numbers and have people in prison who need to be in prison. And we're not wasting time and energy and management time on people who simply don't need to be there.
But the rehabilitative process immediately, if you're talking about, and I'm up for that, if you're saying that you're going to help them with triggers that might cause them to commit crimes, great. I think no one sane would think that that's not a good idea. I think where you end up in trouble is when you're looking at resourcing prisoners and when you're looking to try and equip prisoners with the kinds of life skills that when you go to school in this country, you might not get so easily. When we are seeing schools, colleges, hospitals chronically underfunded, a lot of people are going to say, well, hang on, why would we then put resources into prisoners getting educated and getting rehabilitated? What incentive is there then to stop people going to prison if they come out of prison more qualified than before they went in?
If you listen to what my point I'm saying is I'm actually reducing the cost of prison because I'm reducing the prison numbers. So actually we are presenting a saving, and as I said, the cost of recidivism, the cost of us getting it wrong, costs us £18 billion a year. So I can give you 18 billion reasons why it's a good idea. And now if you can even save 10, maybe 20% of that bill, you've just saved the NHS. So there is a very, very good reason why we should look at offending. We should look at our prison system. We should look at our sentencing, and we need to do this differently. We've been doing it the same way since Victorian times, since we stopped sending people abroad. Okay, and frankly, we're getting it wrong. Now, anybody in power, all the MPs you speak to, they all privately agree. But they're too scared to make these decisions and present these cases because it will upset the voting public, and it's the voting public that will vote them out. But if you actually, the last report the last speech that was made by the Justice Secretary, I mean, he's going down the route of smarter sentencing, and we need to sort of have a rethink about how we do this thing. And previous Justice Secretaries, with Michael Gove and David Gork, all looking at other models to try and do this job a little bit better and really ultimately save the taxpayer money so that tax dollars can actually be invested in everything that you've just mentioned: schools, colleges, education, health.
All right, I think we got the point there. Steve Dagworthy saying, look, it's actually ultimately going to save us more money if we're a bit smarter around the sentencing that we give to people. But a lot of people are going to hear that, a lot of you are going to hear that and think, well, hang on, should that mean that someone like Mary Philpott gets out a little earlier? However, maybe Steve's got a good point, that it's the judge we've got a problem with. It's not actually the prison system, it's the fact that she was only given a sentence which equated to what? Just over a year or so, year and a half maybe, for each child that died. So, I don't know, maybe it's the sentencing that's letting down our children. Certainly seems to be the verdict that's letting down as well the victims of domestic violence we were just talking about as well. So there's a lot for us to dissect. Loads of calls on this. We'll start getting through them after the break here on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
The Logitech MX Anywhere 3 mouse is the perfect mouse for people who work from multiple locations. It's ultra portable, allowing you to work from anywhere, your home, office, even coffee shops. And it's responsive on any surface, even glass. Contoured for your hand, the Logitech MX Anywhere 3 mouse offers precision and speed. And with a sleek and modern design, it looks good too. Visit misco.co.uk.